Hello, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scary-ish Podcast.
Woo!
I'm Robin Grace, and this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And we are here to chat about some interesting topics.
Indeed we are. I'm pretty excited. I'm finally doing a topic that I've really wanted to do since we started this podcast. I'm going to be covering the Yellowstone Supervolcano, so get your ear holes ready and prepare to be freaked the F out. Robin, what are you covering this week?
I am going to be covering Blackbeard. So, I mean...
How scary is Blackbeard? I'm just wondering because I know you said that you were going to be covering him, and I was like, okay, I get it. Like, he inspired fear in the hearts of a lot of people.
I don't think he's really that scary, but it's just, like, legendary, you know? But
Okay.
we'll get there.
Right on. So Yellowstone Supervolcano is one of the things I'm most afraid of in this world. So I think we'll have a nice balance of scary and not so scary. So that'll be fun. But like Robin said, we're going to have conversations. We don't just read stories to you folks and just have like a monotone voice and some music in the background. That's just not our style. We tell our stories and we interact with each other and we talk about it. So I'm pretty excited. But for those of you who have stories, because creepy things have happened to you, we call those homegrown horrors. Robin, what do we consider a homegrown horror?
So, if you guys happen to have a homegrown horror, they are supernatural events, paranormal things that have happened to you, spiritual stories, like say you had dreams and you had some closure with a family member that's died through them or anything like that.
Sleep paralysis, night terrors, stuff like that. Yeah. So if you
or
have
coincidental, hilarious.
Coincidental
things.
ones are really, really fun and really funny. But if you have anything like that, email storytime@scarish.com and send us your story. You can also message us at facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Tweet at us at scarishpod. Or message us on Instagram at scarishpodcast. And you can also go to our website, scarish.com, click on contact us, fill that out. If you have no social medias whatsoever, that is the best way to get a hold of us. And we look forward to hearing them. And then those episodes come out every Friday. And we record them live, in fact, Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you would like to join us and interact with us live, you can go to youtube.com/scarish or twitch.tv/scarishpodcast. And it's a really fun time, and we hope that some of you would attempt to come out. We do have quite a few of you who show up every week, and it's awesome to have you there. And then people pop in every week and say, like, this is my first live show, and they really enjoy it. So if you haven't gone to a live show yet, please do. It's super fun, and it's free. So aside from that, we're going to be meeting up with some of you folks in less than 2 weeks.
Yeah? Oh, my God. I can't believe it's
Winchester
in less than 2
Mystery
weeks.
House, June 9th at 12 p.m. The standard tour is what we're going to be taking. It is in San Jose, California, and we are very excited to go. So if you are going to be in the area and you can purchase tickets, do so now. And we're going to be there. So it's going to be a blast. We're going to take some photos. We're going to go get some food. We're going to go get like spooked out a little bit, hopefully, and just have fun meeting and greeting. So I'm pretty excited for that. But that said, I think we're going to get into our stories. So are you going to go first or am I going to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. So, are you a fan of pirates?
I am a fan of pirates.
I am a very big fan of pirates. I know we just went on Pirates of the Caribbean, the ride at Disneyland, very recently, and you're very bored with it, I'm sure. But like
Pirates is one of my favorite rides when I'm tired because it's like a comfy seat that you can sit down, and it's like an 11-minute boat ride. Maybe not that long. It just it's like the perfect thing when your feet are aching and your back hurts.
Yeah.
It's like, let's go on Pirates. Like it basically. You're standing in line to sit down for a while.
Yeah.
So it's one of my favorite things when I'm tired. Yeah.
I think it's really cute. I'm a very big fan of old school pirates. And what better pirate to talk about than Jack Sparrow, right?
Is that who we're talking about? Blackbeard. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yes, we're going to go over Blackbeard. And I honestly had no idea about him at all.
You didn't even know he was real.
I thought he was fake. I thought he was a made-up character by Disney or something, like just a made-up person, but he is real. And apparently he definitely got his hands in all this different treasure, or as the ladies at MFM would call it, treasure.
Treasure?
They call it treasure.
Did this pirate get a lot of booty? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he got a lot of booty.
Okay.
All right. So I was definitely pleasantly surprised upon finding out that this guy's real and he actually did a whole bunch of different stuff. I'm not going to go over just his treasure, I guess. I'm going to go over everything that he kind of did that.
So you're going to cover his life's accomplishments and not his booty.
Yeah, not his booty.
Not just his booty.
Sure, he had a nice booty. Anyway, so the dread pirate Blackbeard had a real name. You like my Princess Bride reference?
Yeah, I do.
I love that movie. Anyway, His real name was Captain Edward J. Teach or Thatch. I saw both ways while researching, but it's more often Teach than it is the other way around. So I guess it just kind of depends. Still, pirates are known to take on fictitious surnames or give like different names when they're caught and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
And they get nicknames as they go along in their adventures. It's like, obviously, if he has a really thick black beard, he might just become known as Blackbeard. So
yeah, so it's not 100% clear if Teach was his real name at all. And if it wasn't, then Blackbeard's real name will probably never be known. He's just going to be that guy. That's his name forever. He was born in 1680 and grew up to be a pirate. And I wonder if he went through life thinking, yes, I would like to be a pirate when I grow up.
When people ask you, like, what are you going to be when you grow up? He's like a kid, he's like, a pirate. And everyone's like, oh my God, that's so cute. And then like 20 years later, he's like, give me your shit or I'll kill you.
Not a lot is known about his early life. I guess his life as a pirate overshadowed him as a man. So people didn't really pay attention to him as a kid, other than what's known is that he was most likely raised in Bristol, England, and he could read and write, meaning he was born into pretty respectable and wealthy family. An 18th century author by the name of Charles Johnson wrote that Teach was a sailor during the War of Spanish Succession before he turned to a life of piracy. And what turned him during the war is unknown. It's not sure what made him just like triggered and decide I'd rather be a pirate. But I read a few things that say if you were a Navy sailor, you didn't really get treated as well as pirates got treated. Apparently, pirates got treated way better than the Navy would treat you. So maybe it was something like, during this war, I kind of don't want to be a part of it. I'm good. I'm going to go make my own money.
So were like pirates like part of like, were they like mercenaries that were brought in to help during the war? Or
No.
were they just like not even dealt with at all? It's weird to say like pirates were treated better because I've watched Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm pretty sure those movies are documentaries and they're just hunting down pirates.
No. Pirates treated each other better.
Okay.
Than the Navy treated their own sailors.
Okay.
So it was better to be a pirate because the people, at least, that were around you were going to treat you better than the government treated their own people.
Who would have thought that living a lifestyle of stealing stuff and just banging chicks would make you like more, I don't know, easygoing than a life of servitude where you're treated like dog shit?
Teach's early piracy career had him join the crew of a captain, Benjamin Hornigold, around 1716, operating from New Providence in the Bahamas. And Hornigold, his name is so weird, placed Teach in charge of a sloop he won as a prize. And in case you guys aren't familiar with ship speak or Sea of Thieves, a sloop is a sailboat. And I guess
it's like a smaller sailboat.
Yeah, it's a smaller sailboat. But Hornigold and Teach set out to maraud, embezzle, and even hijack. Drink up me hearties, yo-ho.
I hate you.
During 1717, they captured a boat carrying 120 barrels of flour out of Havana, Unana.
I knew it. I fucking knew it.
And took 100 barrels of wine from a boat leaving Bermuda. They also stopped a ship sailing from Madeira to Charlestown, South Carolina. And so it's crazy. So he went from England, right? And then during the war, as a sailor, he went to the Bahamas and stuff like that. And then from the Bahamas, they're like, we're going to go to South Carolina, North Carolina, do a bunch of piracy down there.
Yeah, so even though they're in the area of the Caribbean or however you say it, they still went up and down the East Coast because they knew like there were port cities there and they're like, they got good shit there. Like, let's go.
So supposedly the crews had gained a penchant for Madeira wine. On September 29th of that year, so 1717, they boarded a ship sailing from Virginia near Cape Charles, and all they took from it was the Madeira wine that was on board. So they took the wine and then they scuttled the boat with the rest of the cargo.
That's so much, because scuttle means they sank it, right?
Yeah, it means they deliberately just sank the boat with all the other stuff on it.
So they got on board, took the booze, and then sank the ship. I mean, if I was on board, like while you were reading that,
you've done that though in Sea of Thieves, where you
in a video game, not in real life. Like if I was on board and they came on board and they took the booze, I would have been so happy. Like, oh my God, they're not going to kill me. They're not going to steal anything else. We get to keep everything. This isn't a big loss. Oh wait, what? Like you're sinking the ship? Why? Why would you do this to me?
They're just like, yo, all I want to drink is this. So I'm just going to take it.
Or are they like, yo ho?
Yo ho. Arg, all I want is drink this. Yeah, so they're just like, I'm going to take it. Y'all can have the rest. Oh, by the way, we're sinking you. bye. So it's just so crazy. And it's kind of badass that they're just like, we don't care about any of your other stuff. We just want your wine. And fuck you guys, we're leaving.
And also, we're dicks. Adios.
So while sailing with Hornigold, Teach was able to gain traction as a pirate in his own right, and he began building a large crew of his own. And a report made by an anti-piracy patrol named Captain Matthew Month in North Carolina stated that Teach, or Thatch, was, because in the report he calls him Thatch, was operating a sloop with 6 guns and about 70 men. That's a lot of dudes on his crew, just saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, nearly as small as I pictured it in my head. Thank you, Sea of Thieves, for making me think it was only a 2-man boat.
Right? Apparently, well, because everything is downsized in that game. So, like,
well, yeah, obviously.
The 4-man boat is much, much, much,
it's the
much
galleon.
bigger.
It's
yeah,
the big one.
It should be a million times bigger. But anyway, apparently, a fellow newbie pirate by the name of Stede Bonnet, also known as the Gentleman Pirate, which is kind of cool nickname.
It's a classy name.
Ran a crew of about 70. And that crew was like, man, Bonnet kind of sucks. So when when he came across them, Teach was given permission by Bonnet to take control of his ship called the Revenge. And I think it's so cool that old school pirates were just awesome. Like, the Revenge, how cool is that if you name your ship that?
Well, that's the thing, too, is like, how hard is it to name something? Like, I can never get anything off the ground if I'm trying to figure out a name for it, because I'm like, I don't know.
It's hard, and they were probably just like, man, why are we doing this? Why are we pirates? For revenge? All right, it's called the Revenge.
You can take control of my boat. It's called Boaty McBoatface. Don't ask me why.
So I'm totally cool with the old school pirates, not so much the new, more modern Somalian pirates that are like, I'm your captain now. Not into that.
I am the captain now.
But yeah, I think old school pirates were just, they fought for something totally different. You know what I mean? So it's kind of cool.
Did they though?
I think so. And a lot of sources that I were reading where it's like they were taking money and looting from the crown. They weren't necessarily taking it from everybody that came across. You know what I mean?
I will say the Somali pirates tend to get themselves into hostage situations more often than I would imagine old school pirates would. And hostage situations are messy at best. You know, if you're just showing up to steal shit and then sink the boat, you're going to get in, you're going to get out, and most likely people are going to get away with their lives. But if you're going in there to take hostages and then ransom people, that is a different form of piracy that's just way too involved for me. I think I could have been an old school pirate. I could not be the today pirates. No way.
Now that they had the Revenge, they had 3 ships. And by October of that year, they captured yet another ship, adding it to their little fleet that they were kind of building out for themselves. And apparently, Hornigold only attacked ships of his old enemies. How you'd know that it was your old enemy without modern day technology is beyond me.
I would guess the sail. He probably knew their sails.
Does everyone have their own personal sail?
Unless you're part of like an armada or a navy or some form of military where you're like all going to have the same sail.
Well, yeah, like say merchant ships and stuff like that are coming from England or whatever.
Well, he probably had one of those long periscope things that you hold up to your eye and he could just like look over there.
Is the lens cracked? That's how you see
obviously.
it in the middle.
And you're like, there he is. Like, let's do this.
All right. So the crews felt that leaving any British ships unharmed just didn't feel right to them. And so they demoted Hornigold. They're like, you're too weak. Sorry. We want to attack everything, just not the people that have wronged you. Just we want it all. And he understandably retired from piracy soon after. But certain sources I saw say that he turned into like a pirate hunter. So he just wanted to go out there and destroy all these other pirates.
So basically, they're like, you're too weak. We want to hurt people. He's like, okay, dogs, have fun. He went and found himself another boat and was like, now I'm going to hunt pirates.
Well, he took 2 of those ships with him. So he took his ship, the Ranger, with him, and then one of the other smaller ones. And then the 2 never met each other after that. And Hornigold, along with many occupants of New Providence, accepted a king's pardon from their actions, their piracy actions, in the June of that next year, which is cool for him. Good for him.
So he got a pardon just for quitting?
I mean, I think the king was like, here's a mass pardon after this war, this Spanish war, because we understand that a lot of our sailors left because what else are you going to do down there or something like that? You know what I mean? So he said, everybody is pardoned for all of your piracy acts before a certain date. And then after that, it's just you're an asshole.
It's like we're wiping everyone's slate clean. If anyone wants to get out of this thing, you're good.
Yes.
But if you do anything from here on out, like you're officially a bad guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Teach went on with the 2 ships that he had left and kept on plundering. And at one point, they took over a slave vessel named the La Concorde. Concord? I don't know. But they swapped ships with the crew and renamed it Queen Anne's Revenge, much easier to say. And so it was the Revenge, that ship, plus Queen Anne's Revenge, sailing the seas. And that is boring naming convention right there.
That is. I was going to say, not too original.
It's like, we have our original small boat. We've named it the Revenge. This is a much bigger boat. Let's name it Queen Anne's Revenge. Who's Queen Anne? Why would you name it that? Curiouser and curiouser. And Teach took over the larger Queen Anne and equipped it with 40 guns. Some ships that Teach came across, he was pretty merciful with. So he didn't just murder and burn everything. You know what I mean? They ransacked the ships, but at least let the crews leave afterwards. So they boarded the ships, took the crew, put them on their ship, put them in whatever containment area they had them on there for a few hours while they moved everything over, and then put everyone back on the ship and let them go. And so there are actual reports of his actions and news articles chronicling their activities along the coast. And when Teach stopped the merchant ship called the Margaret on December 5th, 1717, a man named Bostock was on board. And this was one of those merciful catch and release type situations. So Bostock returned to St. Christopher Island, where he reported what had happened to them, and in his deposition describes Teach for the first time, like his actual appearance. So this is the first account of someone describing what he looked like, and this seems to be the source of how he got his nickname Blackbeard.
Everyone picture in your mind what Blackbeard looks right now. Like, have your mind be like a blank slate and then pop up the face of what Blackbeard looks like, and then we're going to listen to Robin's words come out of her mouth and then change that face around.
So his beard was very black and very long. He was tall, had broad shoulders, wore knee-length boots and dark clothing with a wide hat, a long coat of brightly colored silk or velvet. I guess he liked to change it up. And many future descriptions of Blackbeard say he was frightful to look at, striking fear into the hearts of his enemies.
I gotta say, the picture in my eye looks pretty good. I think this guy looks kind of good right now.
And he also wore, like, lots of bands over his body that he put a whole bunch of different cutlasses in and a whole bunch of different guns in. He was just loaded every time he went into battle. So when people saw him, they're like, we don't want to fight. Like, just take whatever you want. Which is pretty cool. I mean, if you're a pirate and you want people to just be afraid of you, you know?
He has very high intimidation factor where people see it and they're just like, you know what, just take whatever you want.
Right. Even his flag was scary. It was a skeleton stabbing a red heart with a spear. So he was kind of just like, will murder. But despite Blackbeard's reputation, there aren't any actual verified recorded accounts of him ever having murdered or harmed any of their captives.
Wow. I'm not disappointed. I'm just
pirate.
surprised.
Good guy Blackbeard. Yeah. I was just really confused because he really hasn't been around in the piracy game very long, and people are afraid of him probably because of what he looks like. And he's taken over a lot of ships. He's taken a lot of stuff, but he hasn't necessarily murdered a lot of people. It's really weird, you know? And
it's like there's a thief that's running around stealing shit, but they don't hurt anyone. You know, like you're afraid they're going to take your stuff, but you're not afraid for your life.
Yeah. By 1718, Teach gave himself the rank of Commodore, and I had only heard of this term in the Pirates movies. Do you remember the Commodore in the Pirates movies?
When you said Commodore, I immediately thought of Commodore 64. That's the difference in our ages showing right there.
So I thought that was pretty cool. And a Commodore is a naval rank that is higher than a captain, but lower than a rear admiral. And you're usually a Commodore if you run more than one ship at a time. So if you're in charge of lots of ships, that's what they call you.
So you're not a store manager. You're an area manager, but you're not quite yet a district manager is what you're saying.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. Got it.
I had no idea about all the things that Blackbeard actually did. So when I was reading all this stuff, I was so mind blown that this person that I thought was fake, that I thought was just some made up character, actually did a lot of stuff. And during the time he was all, I'm Commodore, y'all, his fleet literally created a whole blockade at the port of Charlestown in South Carolina. He actually made a blockade with this big fleet that he built out.
So he had so many boats people couldn't come in or out because he didn't want them to.
So I cannot believe this actually happened. And they ransacked and took all the stuff from these boats that came in. And they did it for a whole week. They did it for days. And it's just mind-blowing. While they were in Charlestown, Blackbeard heard that a ship, or a fleet of ships, had left England with several powerful warships with the goal of getting rid of pirates. And this made the idea for a pardon more and more tempting to him. So he's like, oh man, maybe I should actually go and do this thing. So his big fleet, over the span of a few shipwrecks and groundings, turned into one ship. And he reduced his crew immensely. There's one point where he marooned like 24 people or something like that and left them on a little island. Another pirate had to come and save them like 2 days later.
Did he give them all a pistol with a single bullet in it?
I'm sure that's not what happened, but he just didn't want people to give him trouble for going to do what he was about to do. In June of 1718, he headed to North Carolina and went to get a pardon from Governor Eden in Bath. And once he got that pardon, he got permission to sail to St. Thomas to seek a commission as a privateer. So instead of being a pirate, you're going to actually get hired to go and do stuff as, you know, your own private company person.
He's just going freelance. He's going legit, but he's going to be freelance.
I guess back in the day, that was a way for them to take bored pirates and give them something to do. Like, here, go do that, stop doing bad things.
It's like when you take a hacker and you put him in charge of, like, security.
Yeah. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
You're welcome. I'm pretty sure that a lot of pirates, I mean, I haven't looked too deeply into the history. I just know what my dad told me. My dad was a Marine. The Marines are older than the United States of America, and they were formed in a bar, and they were originally formed so that they could protect ships in the Navy. And I'm pretty sure a lot of those dudes were, at some point in their lives, pirates who were just like, sure, let's go legit. Like, let's just fight other pirates. And I don't know. That's just really coming to mind right now. I'm going to need to look that up, though.
He left with his last ship and renamed it Adventure. So instead of the Revenge or Queen Anne's Revenge, he's like, this one's called Adventure.
Do you think he was running up to the ship and he's like, I'm going on an adventure?
Maybe he actually thought, I'll turn my life around and just go on an adventure and do it this way instead of being a pirate, which is, you know, nice change. But unsurprisingly, at the end of the month, or by the end of the month, he was all, a pirate's life for me, and went back to his old just pirating ways, which is really unfortunate, because if you had a pardon, he wiped your slate clean, you know, you could have changed it, but he was
just like, this sucks.
Yeah. So warrants for his arrest were issued, and extra incentives were given for Blackbeard's capture from the Assembly of Virginia, which would be more than what they might receive from the Crown, aka England. So people were like, let's do it. Let's go out and find this bruh. And a lieutenant named Robert Maynard took command of 2 armed ships on November 17th, 1718, and he, along with some others, headed to Bath, arriving on November 23rd. Maynard and his crew went to confront Blackbeard and the Adventure, and they trapped him, and a ship battle occurred, obviously, pirate ships, all that fun stuff.
I hope everyone's brain is playing the Pirates of the Caribbean music right now.
Go figure, right? I mean, 2 ships or 2 fleets coming together, a battle's gonna happen. They surprised Blackbeard and his crew and eventually killed Teach, and after the battle, it was said that Blackbeard had been shot 5 times and cut about 20 times. So this guy was just not going down. You know what I mean?
It's like the ending that he apparently wanted since he went back to the life. He had to know that something like this was coming.
They found a letter on his body from Tobias Knight, the Chief Justice and Secretary of the Province of Carolina, which meant he could read. He had letters and all that stuff. And they beheaded him and hung it from the bow of the ship. And legend has it that his headless body swam around the ship 3 times before sinking into the water.
What?
Yeah. So kind of an intense death for a guy that got away with so much piracy. Unfortunately for Maynard, though, he faded into obscurity.
So the guy that hunted him down wasn't famous. Blackbeard was famous.
Yeah.
So you said he had a letter on him when they found his dead body?
I have no idea what the letter was about. No sources talk about what the letter was about.
Just that he had it.
Just that he had it on him.
That's interesting.
So, yeah. I mean, mystery in itself, maybe. According to another legend, at one point in Blackbeard's life, I don't know how accurate this legend is because some things just don't add up, but at one point in his life, he stationed men at Cape Henry while Teach was the boss of what is now named Pleasure House Road, and
Sounds hot.
his men would see a ship, then signal their captain of the ship's direction. So if it was from the west, it meant that it usually was the Royal Navy, meaning you gotta get out of there. And from the east, usually meant it was a merchant ship, so it was all for the plundering. And during, man, you know what? I haven't made any pirate speak type jokes.
I was so sure so many of those were going to be in this.
Yeah, darn it. During one particular day, a signal came in that a merchant ship was approaching from the east. And the pirates hopped to it. And since the merchant ship was heavy with lots of valuable goodies, it didn't take long to catch up to them. And after grabbing that booty, they were alerted to 2 naval boats heading their way. And without much time, Blackbeard buried his treasure in the sand dunes nearby and headed to North Carolina to hide out. And they meant to return to claim the buried gold, but never got the chance because Maynard got to them before they ever got the chance to dig it up. And it's still lost to this day. Some say it's somewhere on the south end of Cape Fear in an area called the Gold Hole.
The Gold Hole.
The Gold Hole, the shoal. Lots of rumor, but there have been actual artifacts found in the region dating back to the 18th century.
That's
so,
cool.
It might not be Blackbeard's treasure, but there have been things that have been found, which is neat. And there are other legends that say that his ghost is trying to protect his treasure even after his death. And it's said that if you walk the beaches of First Landing, you might run into a headless specter, a ghostly pirate protecting his booty. And other legends say he haunts a place known as Teach's Hole. Maybe it's the same thing as the Gold Hole. Who knows? People report seeing a strange light moving beneath the water in the cove. And the light is thought to be Blackbeard's spirit swimming around searching for his missing head. And some say on stormy nights you can hear Blackbeard's voice calling out in the wind. And what his voice sounds like, I'm sure no one actually knows. It's been 300 years, but whatever you want the legend to be. And on windy nights with hard, heavy rain, many people say they hear a horrible roaring coming from the cove or a pained voice saying, "Where's my head?" Which is... I think that's for the kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
telling them a
little bit of flavor
legend.
for the ghost story.
I think that last one definitely for the kids, but some of the other things like the horrible roaring could be because wind and rain are going into a cavern type thing, and it's bound to make some noise. He may not have been the most successful pirate ever, but he's definitely one of the most renowned pirates.
I think pretty much everyone has heard of Blackbeard. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Granted, I didn't know he was real, but I had heard of him.
Exactly.
And 300 years, and he's still being talked about to this day, has to mean something. And pretty big deal. His reign wasn't even that long. It was literally just a couple years. Maybe not even a couple years. A year? 1717 to 1718? That's all.
Maybe if it started in January and ended in November, it's almost 2 years, but still, that's a relatively short time for someone to be talked about for 300 years.
And he wasn't a successful pirate at all. There are other pirates that made buttloads, and he didn't. He did a lot. He plundered lots of ships, hundreds of ships in such a short amount of time, and that's what scared people. So that was kind of cool. And that's the story of Blackbeard.
Right on. That's really interesting shit. I knew there was a ghost story around him, and I'd never heard of the fact that there's supposed to be some buried treasure still out there.
Treasure.
But that's super interesting. Good stuff, Robin. I tip my cap to you. So I'll move on into mine then. And I will say, just so you folks know, this is the latest we've ever recorded an episode. We're recording on Memorial Day. So it's coming. I think this episode's out in 5 hours. So if you're listening to it, we just made it. And we're very excited. Also, thank you for your service to anyone who served, because this is Memorial Day and it's a time for remembering. And I wanted to send a special shout out to my brother and my dad and both of my grandfathers who served. So it's an interesting thing. I thought about that while you were reading that, talking about the Royal Navy, and then I thought of the Marine thing. So I thought I'd just do that special shout out.
Yeah, my sister too. My sister and her husband, and they've served, and we have a whole bunch of friends that have served.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
So just tossing that out there. It's not related to anything, but we just want to say it. But I'll move on into mine. And this week, I had the benefit of knowing precisely what I wanted to cover, because usually most weeks I'm either dancing back and forth between a few topics, or I just have no clue, and I wind up going to the Google Doc that we have for some ideas.
This one you've been talking about all week.
I really wanted to do this one for a very long time. And speaking of like our Google Doc, if there's something we have not covered yet, go ahead and let us know. Like email or message or tweet at us. And if it's on the list, we'll put another X next to it so that we know we need to get to it soon. And if it's not on the list, we'll put it on the list, because a lot of you have reached out to us with topics lately, and it's really, really helpful, and we really do appreciate it. And speaking of topics, this particular one, I almost covered this once before, but I was afraid that it wouldn't interest as many people. So lately, several folks have brought it up, or topics related to it, so I'm just going to go for it. And without further babbling, I present to you the Yellowstone Supervolcano.
Supervolcano.
So this is a unique topic for a few reasons. We've covered things like plagues or diseases in the past, but never really a geological scary-ish topic. And that said, this one, at least to me, isn't scary-ish. It's just straight up scary. Like no joke, at least 5 times a week, every week, since I heard about this, I think about this, and I think about whether or not I'm far enough away. And
I don't think we are.
Well, I'll get to it. The thing that this topic has different from all the rest that I've covered is that it is 1, 100% true, and 2, it is going to happen. Like, outside of our planet being destroyed in some form of an extinction level event, this that I'm about to tell you is inevitable, like Agent Smith from The Matrix or Thanos, because those are the only 2 pop culture people I can remember using that word. But it's been used a million times. So for cereal, this is a very real thing. So let's just dive right in. So for those of you that are not from the States or new to the States like Sam, or just don't know, Yellowstone is a national park in mostly the northwest part of Wyoming, which is a state in the United States. And it spills out into other states because it is quite large, like Idaho and Montana. I almost said Ohio. And it's pretty big. Like, the park is around 3,500 square miles. So it's enormous. And growing up as a youth in America, which is what I did, there was only one thing I knew about Yellowstone for the longest time. And I think it's what most people have heard of, and that is Old Faithful. Have you heard of Old Faithful? Mm-hmm. Okay, so there you go. Old Faithful is a geyser in the park that erupts constantly. And you might be asking, how constantly? Well, according to the records since 2000, it erupts every 44 to 125 minutes, averaging about an hour between eruptions. And when I say that, you have to keep in mind, like, it doesn't stop. It just keeps erupting, which is a ton of eruptions. Like, since they started recording these, they've recorded over 1 million eruptions.
No way.
No joke. 1 million, which is a lot. Like, imagine literally sitting anywhere and someone says, like, hey, just mark a notch down every time literally anything you can think of happens, you know, and it's going to take 44 to 125 minutes each time. And it happens once you're like, there's one. That's recording it, and it happened 1 million times consistently, which is why it's called Old Faithful. And that's just something that I knew growing up, like, oh, Yellowstone's really cool. But you never really think about, I've never been.
I really want to go.
You never really think about why. Like, why is something like that happening? And it's really, really consistent. And another interesting fact, it sprays on average 145 feet in the air. So that's a really powerful eruption of water. It's really hot water, too. I think the highest measured ever was 185 feet. They've like put things down into the water, and the further down you go, it gets to like 280 degrees Celsius.
Whoa.
So it's really hot. And that's another thing, is like this geological region within Yellowstone has like hot springs and geysers located around it, which talks about some sort of thermal activity going on underneath the surface.
That's cool.
So the reason stuff exists like this is because there's something going on underneath Yellowstone. And without getting too dry and sciencey, it's basically a shitload of stuff that causes all these other things, in addition to all the lakes and rivers and mountainous areas within Yellowstone, which are all gorgeous. So it's a really cool park. So what is so damn scary about it? Well, underneath Yellowstone is a large magma chamber. And I wrote that, and what I really should have said is magma chambers. And yes, it contains liquid hot magma.
Oh, yes!
I put that, and my next bullet point is literally, that's for Robin from that classic movie, Groovy Man.
Oh, yeah, Austin Powers.
We went to a costume shop, and they had an Austin Powers costume, but it couldn't be called Austin Powers for licensing purposes, so it's just a guy named Groovy Man. So I put that in there. Okay, so now, where there's usually a magma chamber, there is a thing known as a volcano. And I think we all know what a volcano is, but basically, if you don't know and you've never heard of it, lava busts out of the ground, blasting whatever earthly material is in the way up in the air, and usually sending a bunch of ash into the sky. Some eruptions are slow and steady, like those in the Hawaiian Islands, which Robin is familiar with. And some are violent and catastrophic, like, say, Mount St. Helens, which I think most of us have heard of. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the eruptions, like, deposit material in the area around them, which is typically what forms the mountain that turns into the volcano, plus, like, whatever's left over from the lava and stuff like that. That's how the volcanoes are made. So you're probably wondering, like, why are you talking about Yellowstone Supervolcano? I've never heard of Yellowstone Mountain. And you would be right, because there isn't one. There's mountain ranges in Yellowstone, but there's no Yellowstone Mountain. So let's flash back to some of these violent eruptions like Mount St. Helens that I mentioned, and let's just focus in on Mount St. Helens. What's interesting about that is it wasn't that long ago. It was July 22nd, 1980. So a lot of you that are listening were alive when this happened. I was born in 85, so I remember hearing about this all the time. And that eruption was so violent, Mount St. Helens was, that it basically shot the side of the mountain off.
Yeah.
And you can see pictures. There's this whole story about the guy who was standing out and just in the region, and he was taking pictures of the mountain when the mountain exploded. And there's amazing photographs of this, and you can see it.
The documentaries on it are so good.
It's so good. And it's like that eruption was incredibly violent. And like the thing I remember about it since I was born in 85 and people were still talking about it was everyone compared it, and everyone still does this, compared it to the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima in World War II. And they always say, like, and this is what they say, the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and this number varies depending on where you go, because they measure, like, initial eruption versus, like, total eruption or total force used, but the number I find most consistently when measuring it is Mount St. Helens erupted with the force of 1,600 times that of the atomic bomb.
Wow.
So that is quite a bit. That is, for lack of a better term, fucking nuts. Like, if you really try and think of that on a global scale, it's a lot. And then there are eruptions that just blow up the mountain outright. Mount St. Helens is still there, but it's missing a side of it, you know? There are eruptions where the mountain just disappears. And the one I think of, and I think most people think of, is Krakatoa. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before, and there was some hairs that were split. So rather than say it was the loudest sound in human history, I'll say one of the loudest sounds, because my sources are only Discovery Channel and History Channel and a million lists out there on the interwebs. But there are other sounds that have been incredibly loud. But Krakatoa was a volcano. It exploded in 1883. I don't say erupt, I say explode. So it's kind of been a long time. It's like 130, 140 years. And it was so loud, people that were 40 miles away had their eardrums ruptured. So if you were within 40 miles of Krakatoa, your eardrums basically exploded.
Where was that?
Krakatoa is in like the area of like the Philippines, like the Pacific Islands. And the islands that it was located on are gone.
Whoa.
Like, it eliminated the island it was on and nearby islands. It, in fact, has started to pop back up through the surface. And I'm pretty sure it erupted again recently. Not the way it erupted before, but when it went big. The sound of the eruption went around the earth 4 times. That's how loud it was. And people 3,000 miles away clearly heard the sound. This was documented. It was 1883. Like, people wrote this shit down like something crazy happened today. Well, yeah, I heard a big boom.
If they're writing stuff about pirates in the 1700s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly loud. And that explosion, basically just disintegrated the mountain and the island it was on. And that erupted with the force 10,000 times that of the Hiroshima bomb. So we're getting into numbers that are crazy to think about. You know what I mean?
Right.
But there's still atomic bombs that have been detonated that are almost on par with Mount St. Helens eruption. Like, I think the SAR bomb, TSAR, I think I'm saying that right, is the largest nuclear bomb that's ever been detonated. And that was around, I think it was actually greater than the force of Mount St. Helens, because we moved from kilotons to megatons, blah, 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 blah. We're talking about big eruptions. So let's focus back up on Wyoming and Yellowstone Park. Yellowstone has a magma chamber, big whoop. Lots of places do. I just talked about 2 volcanoes. I'm not super scared of those ones. Some volcanoes are straight up extinct, too. Like, they're just never going to go off again, and people are just like, don't even worry about it. You can live next to it if you want to. And maybe that's what's happening here, because realistically, like, when did it last go off? Like if you ask someone, the layperson, someone who hasn't done the research, like when did Yellowstone last go off? They're not really going to know. There's never really been anything written about it until we realize, oh, this is a supervolcano. And what is a supervolcano? But we know about it now, so how do we know this? This is very interesting. And I remember this because when I was younger, I was watching a program on the History Channel about this when they realized what Yellowstone was. And they were detailing how scientists began to realize what was going on. They had surveyors for the last probably like 100 years. The park was discovered, or not discovered, but like established in 1872.
Wow.
So it's been around for a while. And they've had surveyors go out there to measure everything to make sure, you know, they can figure out where everything is and just basically take geological measurements.
Hasn't there been changes to topography?
Let me get to it.
Okay.
Don't steal it. But yes, so you always are measuring stuff to see if there's changes to topography and like eroding caused by different things.
Right.
So they're out there measuring stuff, and something very, very weird happened. So they were out there, and they just realized that Lake Yellowstone, and I'm pretty sure it's Lake Yellowstone, or Yellowstone Lake, however you say it, suddenly and inexplicably had moved.
What?
Like this lake had relocated. I'm not talking about a small pond. This lake is 136 square miles. It's enormous.
How did it move?
So, like, to be fair, like, people were like, where did the lake go? But it wasn't like the entire lake moved. Some parts of it stayed in the same spot. Some parts of it just weren't there anymore. Like where there had once been water, suddenly there was no water. And then they realized where there had once not been water was now completely flooded. And it wasn't a flood. Like the water had just relocated there. So the surveyors came out and they're investigating this, and they realized something very, very significant. The lake had moved because the ground had moved. And when I say the ground had moved, I mean the ground rose. The ground was steadily rising,
and pushed the water,
and eventually it got to a point where the water just started going. It just followed the topography, and like for lack of a better term, like it went with the flow. It literally just relocated, and they're like, "Oh, that's very interesting." And the reason this happened is because Yellowstone's magma chamber underneath it is, quote, bulging. And like, yes, bulging, as in Yellowstone has a boner hidden under there, and it's not an optical illusion caused by the pleats, which is an Anchorman reference. So this explains quite a bit of the activity in Yellowstone, knowing this. Not to mention the fact that there's like a few calderas around the park. Now, a caldera, because I know you're going to ask, is basically a big-ass hole in the earth where an eruption took place. Most volcanoes have this at the peak of their mountain. They don't actually have a peak. They have a blown-off top that has a cave or like a depression in the middle of it. That's a caldera. There's 3 in Yellowstone.
Whoa.
And some of them are enormous. But mostly, they've been filled in by vegetation or water of some sort, but they can recognize
nothing's really been there
because it's been so long. So let's get to the important shit, okay? Before we get too dry and sciencey, when did this thing last go off? Around 640,000 years ago.
Wow.
A long time ago.
So it's due.
Well, here's the thing. How do they know that? Well, to make a very long story short, they dug straight down and they checked the layers that have been left on the ground. And I'm going to post this picture on our Instagram. And they measured the age of each layer and just decided, like, okay, this rock, I didn't decide, but like they measured the carbon dating in it. It's like these rocks are 10,000 years old, so on and so forth, until they found something that they're like, this is odd. I need to point out really fast, because I just realized this isn't in my script, and this is an important thing, that between like 2000 and 2010, the rate that the park was rising was like 3 feet per year, which is insane. And it got to 2008 and it slowed, and it hasn't risen as much since. But 3 feet a year is a ton. In 4 years, that's 12 feet. Like, that will relocate lakes, and that is scary. Like, that is how much the land is bulging in certain spots.
It makes you think how much it changed every single day. So say you went to visit 1 month, and then you're like, oh, let's go visit at the end of the year. It's completely
6 inches higher.
Different.
6 to like, end of the year, it would be like 2 or 3 feet higher. So, and that's just like an 8-year snapshot. So now that we've talked about that, let's get a little real. So what they found in the layer that was about 640,000 years ago was ash. And not like fresh, snowy ash like you think of it, like compressed volcanic ash. And I'm going to give you 3 numbers here, okay? Just 3. So don't freak out. It's just 3 numbers. I was bringing up the Hiroshima bomb, and I keep referencing it, okay? Here's your first number. That bomb was 15 kilotons. Kilo means thousands. You're measuring in the thousands, all right? The last Yellowstone eruption that took place all those years ago, it was 875,000 megatons. So now, imagine that bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. We've all seen the videos. We've all seen the pictures and the devastation. And think of that if it were 58,333,333 times more powerful.
That's insane.
That is how powerful the eruption was 640,000 years ago. Basically, we're talking about power and destruction on literally an unimaginable scale. Nothing has ever been seen like this.
They know that because of the materials they found?
And how far out they found it.
Okay.
And things are going to get super real here. It's destruction on a catastrophic scale that you literally can't even begin to imagine. And if you do try to take that into scale and imagine it, you'll understand why I chose this as a topic. Because it freaked me the fuck out when I was a kid when I watched this stuff. So they find this layer of ash and they realize, oh, this is legit. And now you know just how real this is. So they've since discovered that Yellowstone has erupted a total of 3 times. Only 3 eruptions have been measured. And detected, I should say. The first one was around 2 million years ago. So like the long, long ago. And this was, to put it gently, the big one. Like, and I'm sure you're probably like, you just told me this one 640,000 years ago was like 58 million whatever times more powerful than the atomic bomb. Well, the one that happened 2 million years ago was 2.5 times more powerful than the first one I described. So the whole thing, imagine that 2.5 times more worse. Which, when you're talking about destruction at this scale, that's like world ending. You know what I mean? That's like, that's a cataclysmic event that could wipe out life on the planet.
But it didn't wipe out.
It didn't,
stuff,
though.
Right.
So that was the first one 2 million years ago. Then 1.3 million years ago, there was another eruption. This was the small one. This one was only a quarter of the power of the most recent. So, you know, only 10 million times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. And then the most recent one, 640,000 years ago. So for those of you who are good with numbers, and I know I'm throwing a lot out there, you can probably figure out the volcano goes off around every 600 to 700,000 years, which means the last one was 640,000 years ago. And let's go ahead and push on and get like past the fact that we're kind of due right now.
Yeah.
And most scientists, when they discover this, were like, so the activity we're seeing indicates that we're due for an eruption, and that they use the word often when they discovered it, and they use the word imminent.
Yeah.
That's not as much being discussed, and I'll get to that a little bit later, so you don't have to completely freak out. So they measured this thing. They're
That's
like
when bad things happen, though, right? When
What?
they stop.
I don't know,
it's imminent.
but we're gonna get to it.
Oh my goodness!
So 640,000 years ago, there's an eruption, and there's all this ash that's been compressed. So someone was like, let's measure how much ash it kicked out in Yellowstone. So if you're at ground zero, they wanted to know how much ash had fallen. And they were like, let's figure this out. Let's figure out what the compression rate is, blah, 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 blah. They did some math, and they realized that if you had been in Yellowstone after the initial eruption, after the ash had all fallen and settled, you would have had a difficult time navigating Yellowstone because the ash covered the ground up to around 660 feet high.
What?
Which is insane.
How is that possible?
Because it kicked out, and I'm going to get to the numbers, and they're insane. It kicked out so much debris. It basically blew up a state. Imagine the size of a state, and it just vaporized, shot into the sky, and then rained down. So it's 66 stories of ash. That's ground zero. That's how high it was, which is insane. So if you remember Mount St. Helens...
Nothing would have survived.
No, nothing. And if you remember Mount St. Helens, how it blew off the side of the mountain, the amount of magma that erupted from Mount St. Helens, when they measured it, if you multiply what Mount St. Helens erupted by 11,000 times, that's what you would get for the Yellowstone eruption 640,000 years ago.
Wow.
Not even the big one from 2 million years ago. And what's super exciting about this is they keep discovering new things. In fact, in 2015, they discovered, and there's like 7 or 8, I think, that have been discovered already, but they discovered another magma chamber underneath the other ones. So it's even further down. And this one is massive. So rather than give you square miles and all that stuff.
How do they know?
That's just global satellite imagery and all this other stuff. I don't
okay.
know. But to give you an image of how much magma, how much liquid hot magma can be in this thing.
Magma.
Has anyone ever heard of this place called the Grand Canyon?
Yep.
It's a big hole in the ground in the southwestern United States, basically. And there's a lot of ways I can tell you how big of a hole it is, and I'm not going to do mileage. So has anyone ever heard of the Great Lakes?
Yeah.
They're giant bodies of fresh water in the Midwest, and I grew up on the shores of Lake Michigan. I really did. And they're huge. Like, the first time Robin saw it, we went back to Chicago, and I kept telling her, like, Lake Michigan's a lake and it's fresh water, but like it's like an ocean. Like you can't see to the other side, like not even close. And the first time we came to the shore, like what was your thought when you saw Lake Michigan?
I didn't see the other side.
It just goes on and on. Like if you're in the middle of Lake Michigan, you will not see the shore anywhere. It's enormous. And there's many Great Lakes. I think there's 4 or 5. I can't remember right now.
As someone who's from Hawaii and you can see one island from where you are on the shore of another island, it was so weird for me. Well, okay, I'm cheating because in Maui there's like a small island that's really just super close that you can see it from. Either way, it's just insane because for a lake, that's an ocean, you know what I mean? And a lake that I couldn't see the edge of or the shore of, it was incredible.
It's enormous. So if you gather up all the water in the Great Lakes, it's 6 quadrillion gallons of water. Don't ask me how many zeros. It's a lot. That means if you took the Great Lakes, you lifted all the water out of them and you dumped them into, say, the Grand Canyon, this giant hole in the ground, you could do it 3 times. You could fill up the Grand Canyon, dump it out like that stupid riddle that I put you guys through, and do it twice more. You could fill up the Grand Canyon 3 times with the amount of water in the Great Lakes. The amount of magma in the magma chamber underneath Yellowstone that was discovered in 2015 could fill the Grand Canyon 11 times.
Just that one chamber.
Just that one chamber. Ugh. 11 times and still have some to spare.
Okay, so they know these magma chambers are under there, right? And they know how much is in there. But is that just magma that just hangs out in there? It doesn't ever eke out a little bit?
It doesn't. Okay, there has been some lava flow that's come out. I think it happened in like 2010, 2011 in Yellowstone. But like the amount of lava coming out compared to the amount of lava built up in there is like insignificant. It would be like a drop of water into Lake Michigan. Like there's just so much more underneath. And they're not saying they're completely full. They're measuring the size and scope of the chamber, but it's very hard for them to tell. And when you have something like an overdue volcano and a bulging magma chamber, you're getting an idea of how scary the situation could be.
Right.
So we get it. The scale is catastrophic. We have never seen something like this in like recent human history, not even close. So let's take a look at what happens in the case that this goes off. Rather than toss more numbers at you, I think we all want to know if this thing blows up, who's going to die. Okay. So, for those of you located in the
this
state...
is all I've wanted to know.
in the state of Wyoming, in the eastern half of Idaho, around 80% of Montana, and the northeast portion of Utah, you are in the region that I am going to be calling the boned zone. You won't really know what happened because you'll be dead.
Oh my God.
Taken to the afterlife on the fucked truck. So, if you would like to know how, I will tell you. You will most likely be killed by molten rock melting you. Probably instantaneously.
Is it going to be like Pompeii where it's everybody gets just...
You won't have as much time as Pompeii.
Oh.
And there probably won't be a crappy song.
Oh my God.
You'll probably be killed by the shockwave if you're close enough to the blast zone. And if you happen to survive the initial blast wave and you don't get hit by the molten lava, you can look forward to having volcanic ash rain down on you in droves, which will probably measure at around 750 degrees Fahrenheit or 400 degrees Celsius.
That's insane.
So you will die a very horrible death. Now, for those of you in the states that happen to survive, so how it was 80% of Montana, there's another 20% left, you are in what I'm calling Pound Town.
Oh my God, I hate these names.
You won't be melted or burned to death in a fiery cataclysm, but you're going to have your own problems to deal with. Now, Pound Town is also going to include, in total, the rest of Idaho, the bits of Montana that are left, the rest of Utah, then the new states. North and South Dakota, so that's 2 more, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, almost all of Nevada, which we are currently in. Well, I think Vegas being on the very tip escapes Pound Town.
No, there's no way.
I've seen a lot of maps that include it. I'm going to go with the ones that don't. It also includes half of Oregon, a third of Washington, a quarter of Minnesota, a quarter of Wisconsin, and just the tippy tips of Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and the entire panhandle of Oklahoma. Pound Town's a big town. You are going to be buried in 30 to 100 feet of ash, although it will rain down not at the scalding hot temperature of the bone zone. And
so
the ash,
it'll be like snow.
If it was 30 to 100 feet high, everywhere. And as it rains down, it's basically going to render all means of travel impossible for all of those states. You're going to be buried. It's going to clog all air filters, pollute all bodies of water. It would be impossible to grow any crops whatsoever. Almost all the livestock will completely die off unless you have some creative way to bring them in and basically feed them the food that you have so that you can eat them later. Along with most of the wildlife in the area will have no way to navigate and survive, let alone anything to eat. Outside of this, your zone doesn't get a clever name. But for California, the rest of Oregon, the rest of Washington, the rest of Minnesota, Iowa, and then all of Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico, and most of Texas, you're only going to get 10 to 30 feet of ash. And if you're like, oh, that's
Canada,
not nearly
though?
as much, it will touch Canada. I'm only doing the U.S., but I'm going to cover Canada in a little bit.
Okay.
But if you're thinking of like, oh, 10 to 30 feet isn't as bad as 660 feet, imagine 10 to 30 feet of snow and what that would do. Now imagine it's volcanic poisonous ash and how it's going to handle, how you're going to handle that.
We're going to be living in fallout.
They're going to experience, this is the other thing, it's not radioactive in any way, shape, or form. So it would be like fallout, but there wouldn't be any rads. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. So they'd experience the same amount of awfulness as Pound Town when it comes to side effects from the ash, but they wouldn't have nearly as much ash, so they might be able to affect some sort of cleanup effort.
Would it turn it into like some cold, like block out the sun so we don't get any?
It would certainly block out the sun for a certain amount of time,
Okay.
depending on how big of an event it was. And there's been an event previously that lowered the global temperature by a certain amount of
Right.
degrees. I think it was like close to like 10 to 12 degrees. I'll get to that one because that's another interesting point that I'm going to make about another thing that's really scary when you think about it.
All right.
The rest of the country, the rest of the United States, we get 3 to 10 feet of ash with the exception of Maine, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and the very bottom of Texas. They would get about 1 to 3 feet. In fact, all of North America, Central America, and some parts of South America would have ash fall on them, and almost all of Canada as well. Most of southern Canada in the Western Hemisphere would be in Pound Town. There's even some places that would be close to the Bone Zone.
Wow.
But they most likely wouldn't experience Bone Zone, but you'd still get 30 to 100 feet of ash falling, and they would experience the same things that would happen to us. Probably Vancouver would also be in the Pound Town.
Wow.
So it's cataclysmic on a scale you can't even imagine. Global air travel would cease for weeks, maybe even months, maybe even years, depending on how long. Global. Because it would
Why?
basically shoot itself all the way up into just like every level of atmosphere we have, and the wind would just wrap it around the globe completely. It might not block out the sun, but anyone who is trying to fly that would fly through that ash cloud, your plane would stall and crash. You cannot
there's
suck
no
ash into
oxygen.
your engine at all. Like ash just forms deposits, like it'll take your plane or any engine whatsoever down like almost instantly. It's scary. So like when that mountain, I can't remember the one on Greenland or Iceland, I forget which, it went off in like the mid 2000s or not mid, maybe like 2010. It like shut down air travel to all of Europe, like completely for like a month. It was crazy. And this is like on a scale that's 10 to 20,000 times that. So this is what you're going to deal with. It's a cataclysm of biblical proportions. It really is. This is straight up Judgment Day shit. And most importantly, I've saved the best for last. So this is something I heard back in the early 2000s, I think, around that time. And this has stuck with me that whole time. And I still remember this, and I Googled this until I could finally find it. So there's another supervolcano. Could not remember the name of it. It's called Toba. I was able to find it. Toba. It's not very regular like Yellowstone. There was an eruption a really long time ago, and then it took 140,000 years to go off again. And then it took 625,000 years to go off again, you know? So some of them are quick, some of them are long. The most recent was 75,000 years ago. So it's not that long ago. And when we're talking about like how they wrote about things in the 1800s, they wrote about things in the 1700s about pirates. If you're thinking about 75,000 years ago, human beings existed. Humanity was here. They're on Earth. They're starting to take over, basically. You know, they're coming to rise as the dominant species on the planet. And Toba, interestingly enough, erupted, and it was even bigger than the biggest eruption in Yellowstone. In fact, it's one of the largest eruptions in recorded history ever of anything that we can measure. And it was bigger by about 20% than the largest one at Yellowstone, which in these terms means it could have wiped out life as we know it on the planet. And speaking of that, there is a theory that was developed when measuring the impact of the eruption 75,000 years ago. They were taking ice core samples from Greenland, and this eruption, I'm pretty sure, took place in Indonesia or the Philippines. I can't remember exactly which. But they're in Greenland. They're taking ice core samples they found 75,000 years ago, and they realized that the ice was significantly changed because the global temperature was dropped by 7 to 10 degrees for a significant amount of time when it comes to like a decade or so.
Okay.
So this eruption basically triggered a volcanic winter is kind of what they're calling it. 7 to 10 degrees doesn't really signify like a winter.
That's
you know
a
what I mean?
lot.
But here's the thing. at that time, the planet was already shifting from what's called warm state to cold state. It was moving towards an ice age. And then all of a sudden, the ice age hit, and this ice age was more severe than pretty much any other ice age in recorded history.
Did it wipe out a bunch?
And it wiped out so much shit. Basically, the coming ice age was triggered early because of this supervolcanic eruption. And another group of scientists, while this is being researched, was researching something else completely different. They were researching human history, like ancient humans. And they were investigating specifically why human beings shared so much genetic data. Because human beings are like two human beings you can find on the planet are like 99.9, I think is what they say, percent the same when it comes to genetics. There's very few things that like differentiate people. That number might be high, but for other species on this planet, they have such wild different variations in their genetic data, and human beings are so closely related to each other, they just don't understand why. So they were basically going back to try and figure out why. And while trying to figure this out, they realized there was a bunch of genetic evidence that pointed to a bottleneck in the human population at a certain point in time. And they started to find this genetic research, and they started to go further and further back, and they realized that their theory was beginning to develop that at some point, human beings on the planet, their population suddenly just plummeted to as low as 3,000 individuals.
Wow.
So if you think of the entire planet...
That's less than a football stadium,
there's around
right?
3... Can you imagine that? That's a football stadium, 60,000 people.
Oh my
Imagine
God.
60,000 person stadium with 3,000 people in it. That is the entire population of human beings on the planet. And they did not know why. And they were trying to figure out what could have done it. And something is obviously pointing at like a cataclysmic event. And then they realized the more they started to narrow down their time period, it was like overlapping perfectly with the Toba eruption. And they started to form this theory that this super eruption triggered an ice age that nearly wiped out all of humanity. Our species was almost extinct because of something like this. I'm getting cold chills because this is why it freaks me out to think of this on a scale where it would actually happen, where it's like, what would happen now where humans are everywhere? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And the theory basically states that the reason human beings didn't become extinct is because there was something similar about the human beings that survived that was like a genetic, not mutation, but a genetic difference that allowed them to survive. So it could be a multitude of things. It could be something like, these are the human beings that were significantly more resistant to severely cold temperatures. There's some people that just do better in cold. We all know that. There's some people that just do better in the heat. And maybe this was a group of people who were just really hairy or something. Or they just straight up like they handle cold. Or maybe they could survive on way less calories or way less food than the rest. Like they were the runts of the litter. And when I read that, I was like the meek inheriting the earth. It really creeped me the fuck out, dude. Like I was reading all this stuff when I was like younger, and I read it again. And I'm like, I'm having those same feelings over again. But who really knows? You can't really tell why. But this theory and both of these theories are widely like disputed. But there's a lot of evidence with both of them and a lot of research that's been done, and they overlap each other and they support each other in a way that a lot of the theories that try and disprove them can't account for both of these things at the exact same time.
Interesting.
So it's really creepy. It's really scary to think about it. And all that I know is the concept of a supervolcano is absolutely terrifying. And guess what? I only told you about one. I told you about Yellowstone. I guess I kind of told you about Toba as well, but I didn't get into the history of that. There are 20 known supervolcanoes on our planet.
Like what?
I don't know the names of them. I just checked the list. There are 20. So scientists have, at least in this case, seemed to really search for the causes to give people peace of mind since discovering them. And the long-standing theory for a very long time was that these things are so massive, it'll take another disaster to quote-unquote trigger the super eruption. Like a massive earthquake on a fault line that's near a supervolcano.
Oh, yikes.
So this is the thing, though. In 2014, they haven't discounted the idea that a massive earthquake could trigger a supervolcanic eruption, but they have, as of 2014, the worldwide consensus shifted that the sheer amount of magma that would flow into these chambers would be more than enough to trigger a super eruption without another natural disaster like triggering it. So basically these things can pop off on their own. So it's like, great, I feel way better now. And the tank basically isn't full yet. So I guess we don't need to worry because scientists are saying like the magma in the chambers of Yellowstone aren't the exact right composition for a supervolcanic eruption yet. Like, there has to be a specific type of mix of gas and magma rock and all this other stuff. And they're like, we shouldn't have to worry about it yet. But this is something, like, on a long-term scale that we're going to have to confront sooner or later. One of these things is going to go off. But here's the thing. Is there anything at all any of us can do about it? Well, no. Unless you're going to be one of those people that's going to be the pioneer that finds us a new planet to live on.
Can we get a bunch of, like, air oxygen tanks and stuff like that and just have them at the house for when it does happen? We're covered in ash and we need air.
I mean, I think this is why people that really, like, overwhelm themselves with doomsday scenarios have, like, the doomsday prep shelters where it's just, like, 30 years worth of food and, like, they can sustain themselves without having to worry about anything. And hopefully those people don't live in Wyoming because it's just going to blow the fuck up anyways. But it's one of those things where it's so catastrophic to think about, and it is terrifying, but you do have to accept the fact, like, there is nothing at all that you can do. So you really don't need to worry about it because, like, there's nothing you can do to prevent this specific horrific disaster. But if you suddenly hear a super loud noise for which there is no explanation, do keep this in mind. And you, at the very least, are now slightly mentally prepared because you can just ask yourself 3 things. Am I in the bone zone? Because if you are, you're probably going to die. Am I in Pound Town? Or am I going to live through this? And that said, dear listener, I think you're now prepared for the Yellowstone supervolcano. So I'll see you in the wasteland. Hopefully you'll be nice and everyone bring your bottle caps.
Wow.
And I think that's just about everything I have for the supervolcano that is Yellowstone.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Thank you.
It's also very frightening.
I know, it really is. And I mean, a lot of the science is confirmed science, and then when it comes to the Toba stuff and the bottleneck, that is theoretical science, but it is super terrifying.
The idea of a huge volcano being so close, it's right there in comparison to the size of the world, we're right there.
We're fairly close to Wyoming. We're not like next door to Wyoming like other places. We have Utah between us and Wyoming. So poor Utah.
I was thinking about taking a trip to Yellowstone because I've never been.
I still want to go.
So,
It'll of course, be the day that it goes off.
The problem is the drive is ridiculously far, or we'd fly into Salt Lake, and then the drive from Salt Lake is ridiculously far. It's just a crazy
what's really
way to get there.
What's really crazy is as I was going through this and I was looking through lists of things and like the measurements by megatons of like the explosions.
Yeah.
One of the last things on the list was this, and then there's things after that where it's like, this is what the explosion would be if it was dynamite, because everything is like tons of dynamite, like megatons, kilotons. It was if it was the size of the Earth, like if you took as much dynamite as you could that was the same size as the Earth, here's how big it would be. And then there's things past that, like a comet that hit Jupiter blew up with basically the force of like what I'm talking to you about now would be a blip on the radar compared to like the explosion that happened on Jupiter when this comet just fucking cratered into it. And on that scale is the comet that struck the Earth 65 million years ago that wiped out the dinosaurs. Like, there was no way anything was going to survive that. Like, when you actually look at the scale that had, like that impact had on our planet, like after I saw that, I'm like, well, now I have to cover an impact scenario if a comet or an asteroid were to strike the Earth, and then go through like, if it hits land, this is what would happen. If it hits the water, this is what would happen. And the other thing I was reading about when I was reading supervolcanoes, if there's a strong enough impact to this planet from a celestial object, it would trigger most supervolcanoes in the world to go off.
Gosh.
So it's like, even if you don't die from the impact, the supervolcanoes themselves would probably block out the sun, not to mention all the shit that the comet would kick up. So I'm like, man, there's just nothing to be happy about in any of these scenarios. So I'll wait a while, and then I'll cover probably the asteroid scenario at some point. So
sounds good.
I hope you folks enjoyed episode 77. Robin's was super fun. Mine was not, but I really find this stuff fascinating. So I hope that you guys do too.
Yeah. Don't forget, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/scarishpodcast. If you go there, it's monthly donations. We have a whole bunch of different tiers, but all of your donations really help us keep this podcast going, and we can't do it without you. All our amazing patrons that we have now, you seriously, if you could see me now, I'm doing like fist bump for you. And then we
It's
also
true. I
have,
watched it. It did happen.
We also have coffee, ko-fi.com/scarypodcast. Those are one-time donations, and those help us upgrade our studio setup. So if you've watched our YouTube videos from when we first started to now, you notice a huge difference, not only in how we have set up our office and things like that, but the quality of the video and the quality of the audio. We really can't do it without you guys. So.
Yeah, we appreciate it, and those donations do go to help us do things like the Winchester Mystery House, where we're booking our Airbnb, and we're booking our airfare, and we're booking the actual like tour, because you folks have come out and supported us, and it makes things like that possible. And not every meetup and everything like that is going to be hidden behind like some Patreon tier, but the big ones where we have to travel and pay a lot of money out of pocket are going to be something that we can tie to a Patreon goal. And realistically, we're going to start doing some meet and greets like in local spots, or if we're ever like out in LA or San Diego or San Jose or wherever we're going to be, we're going to like let you folks know so you can come see us, because a lot of times we'll be in Disneyland or whatever the case may be. We want to see some of you folks, and a lot of you have been super cool and come out. We've met a lot of you, and it's been amazing, and we appreciate all of you. So
yeah.
But I think that's everything for episode 77. And Robin, I think you've done the sign out a whole bunch lately, so I'm just gonna let you keep doing it because you're better at it than me. So go ahead.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.